What makes a definitive version of a character? And moreover, what makes somebody the definitive version of a character? When I think of Iron Man, I think of Robert Downey Jr. When I think of Lex Luthor, I think of Clancy Brown. When I think of Batman, there's only one voice that comes to my mind.
I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman.
This mostly unknown New York actor went on to define Batman for 30 years. 3 separate Warner Bros. CEOs, 7 different live-action Batmen had came and went past our screens, while Kevin Conroy was still being a constant in being Batman. Whether it was through animation, video games, live action, this random actor from New York went on to define the character of Batman for what is going to be majority of our childhoods, and for me, he defined Batman for a majority of my very short life. And today, for my 100th video, I not only want to celebrate Batman and finally talk about the animated series, the new Adventures, Justice League Unlimited, but I also want to celebrate Kevin Conroy. I want to talk about his versions of Batman, whether it was from the DC animated universe, all the way to the Arkham games, into his more modern projects where he even got to play Bruce Wayne on live television in person on the CW. I want to cover it all. It's going to be a sort of brief overview, but I want to take episodes and pieces and portions of his career to show why I believe he defined Batman and how he held such a wonderful spirit for the character throughout the 30 years that he played him. But first, I want to start by getting to know the man who would define Batman. I want to do a little bit of talking about Kevin Conroy's life prior to auditioning for Batman and what it looked like after. Kevin was born in November 30th of 1955. He was born, unfortunately, into a very troubled household. His father, by his own admission, was an alcoholic, a drunk, and not a very nice man. And ultimately, this led to Kevin having a tumultuous childhood, something he would eventually grow out of and be able to leave by his senior year of high school, but unfortunately that had lasting impacts on his life. He ended up being diagnosed with severe anxiety and long-term anxiety. And yet, despite all of that, Kevin still wanted to pursue his dream of acting. It had always been a huge thing for him, and Kevin always wanted to do it. So he moved to New York City in 1973, and he ended up going to the Juilliard School of Drama and Vision, studying under John Houseman. He roomed with Robin Williams, oddly enough, which is kind of hilarious, but he ended up graduating in 78, where he ended up doing a lot of theater play acting. He did a lot of things like soap operas, like Another World. Kevin also moved to California in the 80s, looking to do more television and old globe theater. Things like Hamlet, A Midnight Summer's Dream, things you might have read in like high school when you were talking about Shakespeare, for example. But one big thing about Kevin that he kept hidden for a very, very long time was that he was a gay man. And unfortunately, it was during the height of the AIDS epidemic in the 80s that he would often have to go to many funerals regarding his friends and the people he held close. So he felt an obligation to play those characters that might be secretly living with AIDS, such as a TV producer in the Eastern Standard. As well, Kevin kept it hidden for a majority of his career, fearing that it would hurt his career, which is incredibly sad to read about and to have learn about somebody who, to me, was always so inspiring as Batman. He always seemed like such a genuine dude, and so to have to hide his husband from the world honestly sounds miserable. But it was in 1992 that Kevin got his truly big break. He had recently done a whole lot more TV shows in the late 80s to early 90s, things like Tour of Duty, things like Cheers, Search for Tomorrow, Matlock. He had done a lot before being Batman. So when I say he is a random guy from New York, I'm being a little bit pedantic with what I'm saying. In reality, he was fairly well known in live action, but he wasn't famous. And he even admits this when talking about how he landed the role for Batman.
We've seen hundreds of people. And he said, well, there's this really interesting New York actor who does classics, and he might be really interesting to you. So that's the kind of chance that wouldn't happen now. Because everything's stunt casting now. Everything's about star casting. They were willing to look at an actor that no one had ever heard of.
He originally came in to do the casting call for Harvey Bullock, but during so, they ended up finding out just how wonderfully he was able to do Batman. They had tried out just about 60 different actors and nobody was fitting. And I think part of what helped him stand out was his willingness to differentiate the two voices between Batman and Bruce Wayne. Something up until that point, only Michael Keaton had ever thought to do was to help differentiate the voices. And while Michael Keaton might have been the first to do it, I think Kevin Conroy is the most popular iteration of the voice swapping, and something that has become a mainstay and staple for anybody acting as Batman in voice acting or live action since. So from his first day even on casting call, he was starting to lay the bricks and foundation for what would be the beginning of a legendary career as Batman. If you want a more in-depth look at Kevin Conroy's life prior, especially prior to being Batman, I'm not exactly going to be your guy. I really want to talk about how he defined Batman, but I think giving a brief history about Kevin as a person really would go well into this video because he's just such a wonderful person. For example, during 9/11, while living in New York, he made it a point to go and help his local community, even while being known as Batman. He was never above helping other people, and I think it's stories like those that should be told about him. But if you're looking for more detailed, in-depth speaking on his life, I highly recommend this video from Matt Bohm. He does a wonderful job looking at the life of Kevin Conroy prior to being Batman. But for the intents of my video, I want to more focus about, and it's beyond crazy to think what they were able to do with a show that is technically just for kids. The Batman that we see displayed throughout the animated series oftentimes is compassionate, he is caring, he is rarely ever just patrolling the streets looking for pure vengeance, but instead he's looking to inspire and help the people around him. The show has no short order of iconic episodes, from The Mechanic to Robin's Reckoning, Nothing to Fear, Clayface's episodes, the episodes on Two-Face. When we get to talk about the movies, which I want to talk about later, all of these things make the show particularly iconic, but there are a set of episodes that I think about when I hear Batman the Animated Series, and not all of them are necessarily episodes you might think about when you hear it. Episodes for me like Never Too Late, POV, Forgotten, The Underwellers, Joker's Favor, and I Am the Night rank as being some of my favorite episodes in the show, not because there was a big physical threat to overcome or that it had some great action spectacle. For me, a lot of my enjoyment of these episodes come from this deep understanding of Batman and this level of charisma they were able to bring to the production. You see, when they filmed episodes for the Batman the Animated Series, Dini and Tim all wanted the cast and crew to be together. That way they could bounce off of one another in a style that's not really seen a whole lot in voice acting, especially because it can be a fairly isolating business being in your own booth by yourself. Instead, they were in an open studio recording room talking to each other. And I think that really helped bring a lot of these episodes that I love so much to life. I firmly believe that not only is Batman the Animated Series the best version of Batman we have ever gotten, I also think it is the best Batman show we have ever gotten. And I know that's not exactly the hottest of takes, but that is exactly how I feel. And it's for having this variety of episodes that I think are wonderful. One of my personal favorites was always Never Too Late. The episode revolves around Stromwell. Not only is he a big-time maker and distributor of hard drugs, but he's also a father. A father that is very concerned at this very moment because his son has gone missing. And his son's been missing for a minute. But the problem is, he didn't even know. He doesn't know because he's not in his son's life at all. Mind you, this is a child show and we're already opening with big drug dealer loses his child. The episode honestly doesn't circle around Batman too much. As a matter of fact, it feels more like we're following Stromwell as a protagonist. And I think that's one of the strengths of Batman the Animated Series, was that it wasn't just solely focused on Batman. Ironic saying this because it's a Batman show, but having some episodes not like that were wonderful. I also loved that they showed Bruce's detective side a lot more in this show than say in The Batman 2004, which I personally like. But we rarely saw Bruce going undercover. Now, Stromwell is plagued throughout the episode with horrors from his past. Essentially him as a kid getting stuck on train tracks and having to have one of his friends save his life at the cost of his friend's leg. That friend being a priest nowadays. What different paths they took in life. A priest that was more than ready to give up on Stromwell, but Batman wasn't. Batman holds this sort of compassion for the villains in this show that I think work really well. He doesn't just want to send Stromwell to jail, he wants to help Stromwell find his child and to help keep him off the streets, to help keep him outside of the gang life and to stop actually selling drugs. Batman cares about rehabilitation.
He's going to need you.
Arnold? That's one soul I wish I could give up on.
I don't believe you'd give up on anyone, Father. Please be there.
I think it was a great idea to have it play out like this in this episode, where Batman isn't the central focus. It's not him taking down Stromwell, but instead it's all about Stromwell finding himself and finding a reason to no longer be a criminal. Batman alone isn't going to keep crime off the streets, and that's something this show recognizes very well. It's not just Batman. It has to take a change at a fundamental level from the person for any of this to take hold and to take weight. And what does it take for Stromwell to finally snap out of all of this? Not only is it Rupert Thorne completely turning his back on Stromwell and trying to get him eliminated, despite having a tentative peace in the underworld. Another thing I really liked about this show was not the over-reliance on supervillains or villains of the week. Sometimes it was just regular mobsters or regular people. I thought that was wonderful. My favorite part of the episode comes when Batman confronts Stromwell with what he's done. His drugs are not something that only affected his buyers and the people getting them, it also affected him because his son ends up getting hooked. And I think it's very telling that the first thing on his mind when he hears that his son got hooked wasn't how do I help my son, but let me get the hands on the guy that did this. Look in the mirror, pal.
I'll find the guy who got him hooked.
Just look in the mirror. It was your drugs and your people who sell them. I left you to get away from what you're doing. Our son wasn't so lucky.
And not even that was enough to get Stromwell to be done and ready to hang up the life. He was still more than willing to turn his back on Batman the very first second he found opportune, because he wasn't ready to give up this life. Even recognizing the amount of pain and hurt that he has caused his son specifically, he wasn't ready to give up. Instead, what it took was forgiveness. Forgiveness from his friend whom he costed a leg. Something that Stromwell never wanted and never saw himself doing. From when he was a kid, he remembers stealing candy, never doing anything right. Nothing right. So to leave the drug game and go to what? Prison? Then maybe get out and live a normal life? It just never sounded right to him. He had given up on himself long before he got his son hooked, long before he had done anything else. And thankfully he had a friend who was willing to believe in him all the way until I believe his mid to late 40s. Stromwell's not exactly a young buck. And it was through that forgiveness and passion that Stromwell finally was able to let go and to finally turn himself in. And that's something Batman allowed to happen naturally. He didn't just break through the window, beat the shit out of the dude, and left him in a puddle of his own bodily fluids and broken bones. Instead, Batman went out of his way to ensure that not only would this man stop making drugs, he would stop distributing them. All of this would lead to a safer Gotham through rehabilitation, rather than just slapping him in jail for maybe 2-ish years. I think it was a great episode, and while definitely cheesy, I found it very enjoyable, and I felt that it fit the aesthetic of this Batman. Another one of my favorite episodes is POV, mainly because it doesn't happen from the point of view of Batman. Almost everything in this episode is done from the point of view of 3 separate police officers, those being Montoya, Harvey Bullock, and rookie officer Wilkes. You see, they've lost $2 million in cash. This is 1992 $2 million, by the way, in cash they used as bait, trying to find one of Gotham's many, many villains. Unfortunately for them, they've all pretty much been sidelined, and they each had to tell their own version of the story from their own perspective. And I thought that was a really cool and unique way of doing the episode, with some characters mentioning Batman's involvement, other characters pretending he doesn't exist. It really reminded me of Gotham Knight, which is like this amalgamation of different Batman stories. And in the first set of the stories, Kevin Conroy voiced that Batman too, by the way, Batman is shown from the POV of like 3 or 4 different kids, and Batman's different in every single one of them. And I thought that was really cool, considering this is a technical precursor to that. I really found this episode to be enjoyable, even if it has little to do substance wise, and almost nothing to do with Batman. Batman's barely even in this episode, yet I find it so enjoyable. And I think that's really part of the hallmark of having such a great show, is that the title character is barely in this episode, and yet it is still so enjoyable. This next episode is purely out of just it being on the DVD set that I owned as a kid and rewatching it constantly. That being Forgotten. Again, an entire episode that has almost nothing to do with Batman himself, but far more to do with Bruce Wayne, the psychology of Batman, and as well, everybody's favorite Batman persona, lowlife Gaff Morgan. What, did you think I was gonna say Matches Malone? Well, anyways, basically people have been disappearing from the docks constantly, so Batman decides to go undercover in order to look for them. Again, I absolutely love that Bruce goes undercover to do these types of things. We don't see it in just about any other Batman show. I didn't really watch Beware the Batman, so maybe he does it in that show. But from all of the other shows I've seen, stuff like this almost exclusively never happens. It's probably to do with budgeting and having to draw an entirely new asset just for this one episode, which they've done twice now for Brucey Boy. Unfortunately, it doesn't go well. Turns out, when you get hit in the head, some things just don't stay correct. And for Bruce, that means he completely forgot who he is entirely, and instead ends up becoming a slave, forced to do work that no man should have to do, especially unpaid, and in terrible labor conditions. But thankfully for Bruce, that's when he meets a few fellow dudes. Dan Riley and Salvo Smith. These two will be our comic relief and guide to this episode, with Biggs, you're probably seeing him on screen right now, being the owner of this mine, attempting to extract more and more gold through everybody's favorite means of production that both you and me thrive from: cheap and/or free unpaid labor. Anyways, Batman himself pretty much spends a majority of the episode trying to remember things, and doing so unsuccessfully. We're also introduced to the heat box, which is literally where they throw dudes to sweat to death. It's honestly so evil. A part of the episode that I really found enjoyable was in Bruce's dreams and in his subconscious, he's never going to be able to let go of nor get away from Batman. It's always going to be with him in some form or fashion, and in this case it manifests in dreams, his mind trying to make him remember. But even if he sees the Joker himself in a nice suit, none of it matters. Another thing I really liked about this dream sequence is it identifies the fact that Bruce is desperately trying to help as many people as he can, but even as Bruce Wayne, He can't do anything with all of the money that he has. He just keeps giving and giving and giving, and it's never enough. It never will be enough just for him to be Bruce. He also has to be Batman. I really liked that part of the episode. I thought it was fantastic. But as for the rest of the episode, it's pretty bog standard. Bruce is trying to get his life back on track and he's trying to remember himself. But Alfred is out here pulling some pennyworth shit. I actually love how involved Alfred gets sometimes in these episodes, getting outside of the cave and really helping Batman out. Reminds me of the Batman 2004 a lot. I watched that show first. But ultimately, what it takes for Bruce to finally remember is the mention of his family and of his parents, and the mention of newly introduced, one time only, Dan Riley and his family. A character that I almost wish showed up again, because for a one-off character, I found him really enjoyable. Well, anyways, Batman finally remembers his past, remembers who he is, and is easily able to escape the second that he remembers, which I find hilarious. Those Tibetan monks are putting in OT, man. OT. Bruce escapes, he comes back as Batman, and we get what I find to be a really enjoyable fight scene that takes place in the dark, having the people highlighted by silhouettes so that you know it's the dark, but you can still obviously see everything that's happening. I thought it was really cool and quite enjoyable technique to use. Again, it probably seems trivial, but these are just small things that I nerd out about when watching stuff like this. But yeah, getting back on track, this is where the episode is pretty much over, and we get a fairly funny ending to finish off this episode.
Wayne Tech Enterprises. If you'd like a job, I can probably help.
Hit me, Riley.
Hit you? Why?
Maybe I'll lose my memory and wake up a millionaire too.
Another episode I really enjoyed, Joker's Favor. For no particular reason, other than that it very much reminded me of the comic book where Thanos just terrorizes some random dude on his birthday every year for no reason. The entire premise of this episode is that this dude was dumb enough in traffic to get angry and kid-friendly flip the bird at Joker. And because of that, he ultimately ends up being on the Joker shit list and forced to do a bunch of crazy things for the Joker throughout the episode. It's honestly hilarious and very slice of life, something I just don't see in a lot of comic shows nowadays, and I thought it was genuinely a hilarious episode. And I personally love the ending where he quite literally out crazies the Joker. I still think this show has one of the better interpretations of the Joker when it comes to the fact that the character is so malleable and just not really the craziest, most over-the-top evil character. Instead, sometimes he literally stops and does silly, wacky things like this just for the fun of it. And while a lot of these episodes can be light and fun and hilarious and enjoyable, this show also didn't even try to shy away from some of the darker aspects that come with Batman and some of the less palatable things along with the character. The sadness, the brooding, the anger, the angst. God, Batman is so angsty. Obviously, they do it in a way so they could get past WB censors, but I think they did it in such a beautiful way, specifically in the next few episodes I want to talk about. I Am the Night is one of my personal favorite episodes because it deals with the idea of Batman's long-time war being worth nothing. We start the episode by seeing a Batman extraordinarily sad. Jim Gordon is in the hospital and it's his fault. At least that's how Batman feels. He feels that it's his fault. And we get to see him truly contemplate what the cost of his never-ending war is, not only on himself, but those around him.
Sometimes, old friend, I wonder if I'm really doing any good out there.
How can you doubt it? The lives you've saved, the criminals you've brought to justice.
I've put out a few fires, yes. Won a few battles. But the war goes on, Alfred. On and on.
I love the idea that this war grates on Batman mentally and emotionally. That this takes a lot out of him to continue to do constantly. that this show decides to challenge the idea of if Batman is making a difference and if he's doing something good, and not by using some outside source, but instead using Batman as that source of conflict, to me is really the ingenuitive way of doing it and the more fun way of doing it. The rest of the episode really takes place around Batman viewing the anniversary of his parents' death, meeting Leslie Tompkins, who also happens to know not so subtly that Bruce is Batman, and him having a real heart-to-heart with her. This episode's conflict was never external, but rather internal, and I think that's where some of Batman's best stories lie. Not when his physical threat is so great and numerous that we're worried he might not be able to beat him, because at the end of the day, we know Batman is going to win no matter what. So instead, having the conflict be focused on Batman himself, the ideology of Batman being challenged, I think is a beautiful and wonderful thing that this episode does fairly well. I find it very enjoyable, even if I think Batman is a little too down on himself throughout the episode. Kevin Conroy gives a fantastic performance as this sadder, broodier Batman in this episode relative to the way we see him throughout the rest of it. We get to see Batman angry, lash out, sad, brooding, all of these things that honestly the Batman the animated series doesn't usually show, because it's usually more focused on this older, wiser, more emotionally in check Batman that cares about Gotham. And in this episode, we get to see a man upset. We get to see him angry, frustrated, not even thinking rationally. And I think it's wonderful. But for me, where this episode peaks is in his heart-to-heart with Dick Grayson, where Dick is playing the advocate to Batman's devil. He's trying to convince Bruce that he is doing good. He's leaving it up to the legal system. He's doing right by what he believes in, and he's trying so hard to take care of Gotham that he doesn't have to be nearly as hard on himself as he is being. And I think Bruce also brings up a fairly few good points. Things like villains getting out within 2 years, the justice system not doing enough. Is Batman not doing enough? And who is he putting in danger during all of it?
My decision. No regrets. But I can't let anyone else pay for my mistakes.
He's worried for the people around him and worried if he's still doing the right thing. And I think with the two episodes I want to talk, well, the episode and movie I want to talk about next, it becomes very apparent why he's thinking like this.
Said and done, how much good have I accomplished? They sell t-shirts of me. I've become a cliche, more good for the tourist trade than the streets.
And I love the fact that it's through Dick Grayson's encouragement that Bruce was able to find himself in the episode and find a reason to keep going and keep doing what he's doing, because later in the episode he just takes it off and gives up for a while, and leaving Robin to do it by himself, only for Batman to come back. And I think it's so vindicating that at the end of the episode, a criminal he had caught earlier in the episode doing something wrong had reformed from his meeting with Batman. Not because he got sent to prison, not because he was beat to a pulp, but because he realized what he was doing was terrible, and that it would only lead to consequences like meeting the Batman. Batman changed the dude's life without having to beat him up. And I think that's what Bruce lives for, and Bruce needed to see that as a win at the end of the episode, because that's what gives him hope to keep being Batman, to see a positive change in Gotham. Bruce easily could have brought him in for that infraction just to be a dick, but he didn't, because it seemed like that man had changed his life. For the final actual episode of the animated series I want to cover, because I think this video is going to be long enough as it is, it's the one I watched the most as a kid, and probably the one that stuck with me the most, which is Underwellers. I can still very much remember the chicken portion of this episode so very well, but that's not the reason it stuck with me growing up. It's the fact that this episode is almost, again, like not Batman centered, and as well, it's far more about these kids who are living what is honestly one of the most horrible lives they possibly could. They're underground mining, they're underground trying to make food for the Underweller. They're not allowed to speak, they're not allowed to be seen nor heard, unless explicitly given permission for any of those things. Throughout the episode, not a single one of these kids speaks. Not a single one of them sees the light. They're all trapped underground in a sort of Pied Piper-esque envisionment from this terrible evil man who is running the show. He doesn't care for the kids in the slightest beyond what they can do for him. They can steal for him, they can farm for him, they can dig for him. And if they don't do those things, and if they make sounds, if they are heard, it is severe punishment. He forces them to live in the dark so that he can punish them with the light, the bright lights. He keeps these kids hostage, and it's honestly one of the most abhorrent things I remember seeing as a kid. And like, I read Punisher Max around the time I watched this episode, so I guess that's saying something, but I also guess I probably couldn't conceptualize what was going on in that comic book anyways. I was like 10. Regardless, Batman ends up finding what he believed to be a leprechaun stealing on the streets. He finds it to be this kid, a stray. So what is his first reaction result? This is pre-Robin, I believe. He brings him to the Batcave, immediately wants to take care of this kid and find his home, find his parents. It's that level of compassion that I love so much about this Batman. The idea that he is compassionate, and it's something that is either seldom forgotten or left at the wayside, and that I find happens too often. Another one of the things I really enjoyed was this kid reminded me a lot of a young Jason Todd, and he was giving Alfred hell. It was honestly hilarious, especially as Alfred was trying to teach him proper table etiquette, and he's just stealing all of the silverware. This episode also serves as a true emotional episode for Batman. It's seldom in this show specifically that we see Batman genuinely get angry at a villain. For the most part, he is compassionate, he is understanding. He comes with a level of empathy that honestly, I'm surprised any iteration of Batman has ever really had. He sometimes reminds me of Wally West's Flash with the levels of care and altruism that he carries himself with outside of the darkness and the shadows and the fear. And I always, as I've said before, found it wonderful, but it is in this episode that we see a distinct lack of this. Because when Batman finds the Underwellers, the kids that are forced to live underground, in the dark, afraid, forced to steal, not allowed to speak or read or learn, not only does he go there to take photos, but he is angry. This Batman that is so known for his compassion is beyond himself, because this is a sin that Batman sees as unforgivable. To take the innocent and corrupt them, to break them, to beat them down into being nothing more than glorified slaves. This, for Batman, was the thing that he hated the most. I mean, dude was gonna let him die to a bunch of crocodiles because Bruce doesn't care at this point. He is so very angry with this man, and it's very much seen at the end of the episode where, yes, he does go out of his way to save the dude, but he makes it very, very clear that for once in his life, he wishes the court system was not the system he abided by. He wished this wasn't who he had to be, because he believes this man deserves far worse than a court sentencing.
Why? Why? Why?
I don't pass sentence. That's for the courts. But this time, I am sorely tempted to do the job myself.
Man, I really can't talk. Anyways, this all serves as showing us that Batman is human in his morals, his ethics, and his codes. That's why I love this episode and the previous one so much, because it's a challenging, slightly in this episode more so than the prior one, of Batman and his code. And the final episode that I want to talk about, hopefully I didn't call that one the final one, anyways, is Perchance to Dream. Not only because Kevin Conroy has to voice four different characters at the same time in this episode, and does a fantastic job doing so, because again, he is the GOAT of Batman. I think that's undisputable at this point. But in this episode, we're given a vision of what Bruce thinks would be his perfect life. No Batman, no need to fight crime. There is almost no crime in Gotham that can't be taken care of an already existing Batman. His parents are alive. One thing I think is cool is the idea that he believes a Batman needs to exist for Gotham, but he doesn't want it to be him. He doesn't want it to be him. And I think that's such a beautiful thing, is even in his subconscious, he recognizes that Batman needs to exist, but he hopes it isn't him. He's also married to Selina Kyle, engaged to Selina Kyle in this episode. A woman that he has somewhat had a tumultuous relationship with throughout this show. But it is upon seeing Batman that Bruce starts to want to wake up. He sees that Gotham is under the protection of a bat, but it stresses him out that it isn't him. And even try as he might, when he is finally able to let go and say, okay, there is a Batman, there is somebody taking care of Gotham, there is somebody protecting Gotham, it's not enough for Bruce. Because even this show gets the idea that this is an obsession for Batman. This is an obsession for Bruce because he's never going to be able to let go of the death of his parents. He's never going to be able to let go of the idea that Gotham needs a protector, and he's too selfish and self-centered to believe that anybody else could properly take care of Gotham, nor that anybody should have to bear the burden of properly taking care of Gotham, because he recognizes the unique hell that he has to live in order to keep people safe, and he doesn't wish that burden on anybody else. Yes, he is obsessive. Yes, he is not the most sane person, but he is actively trying to help Gotham as best he can. It also doesn't help that he tried reading a book and, well, when you're dreaming, you can't read. I read when I dream, so I don't know what's wrong with Batman. He must just be man or something equally as insane. With all of that being said though, Bruce eventually does go on to try and confront Batman, because to him, this is who he is at the end of the day. He has given his entire life to being Batman. So he goes to challenge this imposter at the place he knows he'll always be because it's part of his nightly patrol. I love that he has a nightly patrol and a set schedule. It's all so cool. I was the kind of nerd when I was a kid that was obsessed with the Batman encyclopedia to a point that I knew everything Batman ate for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And that's how obsessive I was with this character growing up. And part of that love really stemmed from this show and from Kevin Conroy. I'll get more into that later in the video, but I just remembered that, so I figured I'd say it before I forgot. And it's in this clock tower that it's revealed to Bruce that all of this is a dream. It's supposed to be his perfect dream given to him by the Mad Hatter. There's a Batman protecting Gotham. He gets to be himself, the eligible bachelor who's getting engaged to a woman that he cares about. He has his parents, he has everything he could ever ask for, but this dream is a lie. It's a dream that Bruce had given up on way long before this episode ever happened. Longer than Batman technically existed as a construct. So to him, this was all fake, and it's not his dream.
A beautiful story. You have love, wealth, a family, all you ever wanted. Your own private wonderland.
No! I won't live a lie!
And that's because Bruce's dream died in what I would consider the greatest Batman movie of all time. Animation, live action, doesn't matter. This is my favorite Batman movie, and I think it's the best Batman movie. As much as I love Robert Pattinson's Batman, as much as I have a love-hate relationship with Christian Bale's Batman, this, to me, is the perfect Batman film. Not only does it harken back to the ideas of what created Batman, it gives him conflict in his ideology, it melds the past and the present in a almost perfect way, but it also gives us an excuse to truly get an origin story for this Batman. We've seen glimpses and blips and peers into it during the original run of the show, but it was in this movie that we got a full stop backstory, and we're introduced to one of the best original characters introduced to the Batman mythos. gee, I wonder if there's like another one that gets flanderized and bastardized in future canon because she got super popular. You know, that maybe that happened. Anyways, I'm talking about Andrea Beaumont, who happens to be the Mask of the Phantasm. Ooh. You know what? Yeah, I think I'm just gonna leave that in. Getting back on track, Bruce has pretty much given up any sense of normalcy or dating life that we can see throughout a majority of Batman the Animated Series, the new Batman Adventures, and pretty much the DCAU as a whole. And he gave up all of that dating life because he gave up that part of himself when he lost Andrea Beaumont. For him, that was his endgame. That was his singular person that he would have given up everything for. And that's what this movie explores. I think it is beautiful, I think it is dark and sad. The conflict was never external in this movie, and that's the part of it that I love so much. The conflict was almost all internal. It was all learning about Bruce's past, him dealing with his past, and trying to continue to move on from Andrea Beaumont as she reappears in his life throughout the film. It's also interesting to note that this film was originally made for direct-to-DVD before being given a theater release. A theater release that flopped, mind you. The best Batman movie ever flopped at the theaters during a time when Batman movies were pretty damn popular. The show was pretty damn popular, but this movie flopped. And it's ironic it didn't receive its flowers until much later in life and is considered a cult classic because it is the best Batman movie. I love the connection that both Bruce and Andrea share because she, much like him, is dealing with the loss of a parent. They are dealing with pain and suffering, but they're finding hope in each other. They're finding good times in one another, something outside of their troubled lives. Andrea with her very questionable father and business tactics, and obviously Bruce dealing with his whole Batman thing. And I also liked in the movie, because I'm a real sucker for this, seeing Bruce on his first night out trying to put everything he's learned into practice. No bat suit, no nothing. He's bare. And it's so very clear the criminals think he's I said a no word. They think he's a joke. And so they don't take him seriously in the slightest. Not that the dude dressed up like a bat is really something to take any more seriously when he first pops up on the scene. But again, baby steps for Batman. Batman recognizes that his first night on the job was not very good. It was actually really bad. It went pretty bad. He also recognizes that they're not afraid of him. Something that is so obviously unique to the Batman mythos is the need of the fear of the criminals to be afraid. That's something Bruce wants very badly. But while he's practicing and recovering, he's interrupted by Andrea Beaumont, and that's where we see the main conflict for this version of Batman in the past, which is the idea that he's willing to give it all up for her because he can't do both. He makes that very clear. He can't keep up this double life if he's going to take her seriously, especially when she sees him hurting. I am also such a huge sucker for an inverse of Batman, one that uses their vengeance instead of trying to rehabilitate, instead to eliminate. It's a trend we've seen constantly, but I think the aesthetics of Andrea Beaumont in this film are perfect. She gets what it means to encapsulate fear and gave us one of, if not the coolest looking suits ever, especially in the Batman the Animated Series style. Oh my gosh, I really want to recreate one of these when I go to a con one day. I feel like it would be super awesome to be in that suit specifically. I kind of love that when Andrea gets into town and Bruce realizes that she is back after leaving him for so long. Bruce is low-key just, I said another no word. He was low-key just creeping on them, and I find it to be absolutely hilarious. It really reminds me of that scene in Amazing Spider-Man 2, where Peter's just like following Gwen around the city. Now, you could write it off as Batman having suspicions of a brand new terror pops up in town around the same time Andrea Beaumont comes back, but let's be real. Bruce wants to remember the good times with her, before he was Batman, before he gave his life to a crusade that is slowly going to take more and more of him as a human being and is going to be so tough for him to maintain, as we've seen in the last 2 episodes previous that I've talked about from the TV show. Instead, we get to see him envisioning a future with her, a future that is bright, that is happy, that is filled with technology and wonders we could only imagine. And I think it's so symbolic that that future is also completely crushed when we see it in the present. When we see this place in the present, it is destroyed, it is crushed, it is ruined, much like a future and any chance Bruce had at being happy outside of Batman existing. He even has his own Spider-Man moment when he's doing way too well against a group of biker thugs and ultimately has to dumb down his abilities in front of Andrea because, damn, those Tibetan monks done taught this brother how to jump over motorcycles. Dude, I keep saying no words during this recording. This is getting bad. But getting back on track, Bruce has finally come to the decision. It's either this or it's Andrea Beaumont. And I love the fact that he ultimately decides to not only consult Alfred, but to also consult his parents on this decision.
It's gotta be one or the other. I can't have it both ways. I can't put myself on the line as long as there's someone waiting for me to come home.
Miss Beaumont would be glad to know you feel that way, Master Bruce. She's holding on line 1, sir.
This is one of, if not the greatest scenes in Batman fiction, particularly in Batman's early life. His consultation at his parents' grave is fantastic. That beautiful sense of sorrow he has when he is asking them, please, let me be done. Let it be somebody else.
I don't want to let you down, honest, but it just doesn't hurt so bad anymore. You can understand that, can't you? Look, I can give money to the city. They can hire more cops. Let someone else take the risk, but it's different now.
There's a reason I decided to back up Perchance to Dream with my analysis of this movie, because I think it fits so wonderfully together. In this movie, he is begging for somebody else to take the mantle, and in Perchance to Dream, he refuses to allow somebody else to take the mantle, or refuses to allow somebody else to carry that burden he believes he should carry. And ultimately, he will end up carrying this burden. I mean, these are all flashbacks, so mentally, like, we knew, but it's more about the journey of how we got there. Bruce proposes. He is fully ready to give Batman up, to let somebody else take the risk, to be happy in his life. But when Andrea eventually tells him no, due to circumstances revolving her family, the evil people they're in bed with, and the poor decisions she has made, unfortunately, that simply leaves Bruce with one option, and that's to be Batman. And so for the very first time, at least in this Bruce's version of history, he dons the suit. And I absolutely love this scene in the movie because Alfred is so afraid. It's like he's seeing something terrifying when in reality, bro probably looks goofy as hell. Everybody knows the early Batman suits are always kind of funny and goofy, but I love the framing of the shot. I love the idea that it's horrifying. His eyes get really white and small. He looks menacing. I think that's fantastic. I also love the fact that it's draped in nothing but pure shadow. We never actually get to see it. And I think part of the identity of Batman and the mythos is the imagination. When you really get to looking at him, he's not that scary, but it's that image you conjure up in your mind. Now, nearing the end of the movie, we kind of get the revelation that Joker is partly responsible for the killing of Andrea Beaumont's parents, and also partly responsible for potentially killing Bruce's parents, and a whole lot of other stuff that I wasn't like the biggest fan of, but also didn't think was terrible. This is also where the idea of the future land of tomorrow being rusted and broken and forgotten comes into play. which again, beautiful symbolism on the part of the people who made this movie. I also love the parallel drawn between Andrea and Bruce at the end of the movie. The idea that they both use vengeance, it's just one uses it as an excuse to kill others, and the other person holds themselves to a more morally righteous standpoint. I'll leave that up for interpretation as you will.
No, I can't do that.
Look what they did to us! What we could have had! They had to pay!
But Andy, what will vengeance solve?
If anyone knows the answer to that, Bruce, it's you.
I thoroughly enjoyed this Batman movie. I have my reasons for why I believe it's perfect. Hopefully I outline them in a decent way, but I truly enjoy this movie and wish that it had gotten the fanfare it deserved when it released in theaters well before I was born. But yeah, this was very enjoyable. I'm glad to get to talking about this. I'm also glad I have the version of the movie with the blood and not the censored version of the movie, which would have sucked. And as to where this fits on the timeline, I think I'm gonna let somebody a bit more qualified do that, because I am quite curious where it fits on the timeline. But with my luck, Watchtower Database has already done the work for me, because they're the goats at this shit, man. I also love Alfred's speech at the end of the movie, reassuring Bruce that it's not his fault. There was nothing he could have done.
I always feared you would become that which you fought against. You walk the edge of that abyss every night. But you haven't fallen in, and I thank heaven for that. But Andrea fell into that pit years ago. And no one, not even you, could have pulled her back.
And of course, one last parallel to show both characters in indescribable pain, because this movie doesn't end on like a happy note. This is the end of the movie, and it's kind of sad. Batman keeps being Batman, and Andrea is out somewhere in the world by herself. Neither of them are necessarily happy, but Batman is still doing what he believes needs to be done. And while we're still on the topic of Batman, the animated series, I wanted to go ahead and give some time to Mr. Freeze. Now, I know he has a movie, Hard on Ice. I'll be wholeheartedly honest, I don't care a whole lot for this movie. I've seen it like twice. I think it's alright. It's not like my favorite thing ever. But I more or less want to talk about Mr. Freeze and how the animated series kind of reinvented him as a character and took him from a petty jewel thief who was great for one-liners and made him this very deep and thoughtful character that has this very tragic backstory. He cares for his wife immensely. That's the whole reason he does any of these things, is to hopefully one day find a cure for his wife and her ailment, which is incurable. I think it's a really sweet storyline, and I think it helps to add depth to a character that is ultimately usually nothing more than a jewel thief and really boring. As well, something I did like about Sub-Zero, and typically throughout the animated series specifically, was that Mr. Freeze felt very human. He felt very personable. He never really wanted to hurt a lot of people. He just wanted to take care of his wife. It made him a very easy villain to root for. It made him very sympathetic. One of my favorite portions of Batman Arkham Knight is the DLC involving Mr. Freeze, because that final send-off was absolutely beautiful between the characters. And while on the topic of character reinvention, I also think it's fairly needed to mention Harley Quinn, you know, a character created solely for this show who became so popular she is now a mainstay in mainstream comics. Multiple spin-offs, multiple solo series, multiple different things Harley Quinn has gotten because she was put into this show. And she serves a really great role here, and they get the core of the character pretty right. It's just somebody who is unfortunately fallen under whatever the Joker wanted from his lifestyle and has been taken advantage of. As a matter of fact, there are a lot of things in this show that point to them having a very toxic and terrible relationship. One of my favorite Harley-centered episodes is Harley and Ivy, which went on to spawn one of my more preferred romances in DC Comics when it's written correctly, Jesus, that's like the caveat with all comic books, I guess, but specifically Harley Quinn. If written properly, she is one of the most compelling villains to somewhat anti-heroes out there in comic books, and it's so lovely to see, especially when she's paired up with Ivy. But unfortunately, and time for a little bit of a side rant, Harley has either been written as a one-dimensional joke character or has quite literally been the center of fetish-based content in DC. I'm not letting go of that stupid fart comic. Who greenlit that? I get that a lot of comic books are like poorly disguised fetishes by the artists or the writers or whoever, but holy shit, dude. Who actually at DC sat down, looked at that, and greenlit it? It's a scratch and sniff too. I genuinely don't understand how we got to such a flanderization of a beloved character that has so much potential for storytelling, and instead we waste Harley Quinn on weird fetish comics. I don't got any words for that, unfortunately. It's pretty much one of the worst things I've ever seen come out of DC, and that's saying a lot. Immeasurable disappointment on a character I am very fond of and very much enjoy reading when written well. It's just so frustrating. But I wanted to give thanks and also give credit to the show that created her, especially because I'm on the topic of the show. Even if this is supposed to be a solely Batman video, I'm gonna expand out to the rogues a little bit just to talk about Harley and Mr. Freeze. Oh, and what's this? Art style change? Yes, indeed. Batman, the animated series, eventually had to come to an end and was ultimately renewed under a brand new name along with a brand new art style. The New Adventures of Batman. It was an entire rebranding of the show, redesigning of every single character, basically a look at the world from the ground up, but covering the same continuity. And honestly, I don't know how to feel about the art style changes. I don't know how I feel about Bruce Wayne looking younger and more clean and refined and less wrinkled. I think the bat suit is a little bit better, but I do miss the yellow emblem. I think Tim Drake's Robin looks fantastic. Harley Quinn's almost nigh on untouched. I think the white skin fits Poison Ivy better, but I don't think it fits Catwoman at all. But outside of just visual changes, for the most part, Batman the New Animated Series was just more of the same greatness we got from Batman the Animated Series, just in a new packaging. But I also think the new Batman Adventures was host to a lot of great episodes. We essentially got a part 2 to Harley and Ivy, which I really enjoyed, but we also finally got the introduction of Tim Drake into this show, which is a little bit interesting because it's not like the traditional Tim Drake. And of course, he also happens to host like some of my favorite episodes, including the one where Clayface gets split off into his own existing daughter and he's looking to reform with her. Thought that episode was great, it was fantastic, and it mostly featured Tim Drake, who I mentioned earlier as not being like a normal origin for Tim Drake, and that's because this version of Batman doesn't have a Jason Todd that we know of. Unless Watchtower Database has proved that already, I don't remember. Anyways, to the best of my knowledge, there is no Jason Todd in this universe, so Tim actually ends up filling the role of not only Tim Drake, but of Jason Todd as well. We also kind of see that with the whole Batman Beyond Return of the Joker movie, where he fills in for the Joker through biomechanism and torture. But yeah, basically Tim is an amalgamation of Jason and himself, and I've always found that to be kind of fun because at first when I saw his origin episode in Sins of the Father, I had originally thought this was Jason Todd, but they ended up adapting Tim instead, and I think that was probably the best call, all things considered, with Jason and his sometimes complex, well, particularly complex history at this time. What was this, the 90s? Actually, had Jason even come back from the dead yet? I take it all back. This is me correcting myself in real time. Under the Red Hood didn't even happen until the early 2000s, and this show existing in the 90s means that Jason had never been revived up to this point. Meaning, technically, Batman Return of the Joker predates Jason Todd. So, yeah, well, Jason Todd coming back as the Red Hood. Wow. Just, wow. The things you learn when you do these kinds of videos. Getting back on track, I thought that was a great way to amalgamize the two characters and to, you know, sort of give us Jason Todd without giving us Jason Todd, considering he was so hated, y'all voted to kill him in the 80s. Yeah. Oh, and that, for the most part, he was fairly one-dimensional. At one point was just a complete carbon copy of Dick Grayson, but we don't talk about that. Another episode I have like a love-hate relationship for, but it's also arguably one of the most iconic episodes to come out of Batman the Animated Series and the new Batman Adventures, is obviously Old Wounds. Old Wounds tackles the story of why Nightwing eventually left Batman's shadow, decided to become his own superhero, and no longer wanted to work with Batman. And if there's something I really enjoyed about this show, is the fact that even though they do paint Batman as being more compassionate, being more sympathetic, they don't shy away from his obsession, his lying, and just his general Batman mannerisms that he almost always seems to have, no matter how good-natured of a bat we're looking at, comparatively to the less good-natured Batman. And in this situation, it just comes down to lack of trust and a lack of communication. Something I think Batman genuinely struggles to have, and should most likely struggle to have in most iterations, at least the ones that I really prefer, because that's a core character flaw to him. Because his crusade is so overarching and all-consuming, he needs to have control over it all. And to top it all off, he also feels that he has to hold back information when it's for the betterment of the people around him. And in this scenario, he believes that for the betterment of the people around him, it would be best if he doesn't tell Dick Grayson, who's actively dating Barbara Gordon, that Barbara is Batgirl. And like, he's made it very clear, like, Dick has wanted to tell her and be open and honest about what he does, but also to keep her safe. So not only does Barbara like somewhat know already that he's Robin and he can't tell her, but it's also insane to think that Batman is actively putting another person at risk, somebody that Dick is very close to, and she knows this and just is okay with it. I would have been pretty scorned too. We're just gonna pretend that comic where Bruce sleeps with Barbara and they have a kid, and that's why Bruce and Grayson really do fall out in the future for Batman Beyond. We're just gonna pretend that doesn't exist and that never happened. I'm pretty sure it's not canon anymore. At least that's what all of you guys told me like a year ago when I brought it up in one of my other videos. And that is how we get one of the most iconic scenes to come out of this show, at least in my opinion. The one I've seen floating around on the internet ever since I was a kid. So like during the beginning stages of like 2009 YouTube, I've pretty much seen this clip floating around, and it's of Robin just absolutely decking Batman. And I think that is the most iconic clip to come out of this show, the new Batman Adventures. It was also my first introduction to Nightwing, a character that I grew to love for a very long time, and at one point for a majority of my childhood was my favorite superhero. Eventually I found Static Shock, but before doing that, Nightwing was my guy. Except the mullet. I could never, ever get behind the mullet. And with all that being said, I guess the next show to talk about happens to take place about 20 years from today, unless time is a sliding scale, and that's how Timmy intended it, but I'll never know.
Neville. You coming?
I guess it's about time.
So, at this point, I've talked my fair share about Batman Beyond on this channel. Some of you may have seen the videos already, others not so much, but I firmly love this show. And as I said the first time I covered this episode, I absolutely love how it ends Bruce's career as Batman. I personally think it is the perfect way Bruce should be written off as Batman. Not dying, not because he just wants to give up, but because he physically became too old to be Bruce Wayne, to be the Batman. the guy who doesn't have to rely on guns in order to save the day, a man who is so devout in his no-kill rule that he would refuse to pick up a gun, let alone use one. Forcing Batman, this version of Batman, to use a gun at the end of his life to not only save the person behind him, but to save the person in front of him, is one of the greatest storytelling and narrative devices I had ever seen in a Batman series, especially during my childhood. I thought it was absolutely genius and gives a perfect way for Bruce to officially put down the mask and to say he's done being Batman. I think this would be the only way Bruce would ever consider being done being Batman, would be if he had to do something like this. And while we're on the topic of his no-kill rule, as I've been making this video, a whole lot of discourse has been going on, especially on TikTok. I watch a lot of TikTok. That's been going on about Batman's no-kill rule. And I mean, all I have to say about it is like, the no-kill rule works perfectly for Batman. It works perfectly for a kid who grew up and saw his parents being killed by gun violence to not want to ever use a firearm, nor to kill people, but instead to leave it up to the judicial system. I think that works perfectly for Batman. I'm not saying it's a moral code to live by, but I am saying that that narrative device works wonderfully for Bruce and creates a lot of drama, both externally and internally. I love the idea that some versions of Batman tackle the concepts of what it means when his criminals are essentially getting out every 2 to 4 years, or every few months in like the Joker's case, and how that weighs on Bruce and how that makes him feel almost useless and challenges his moral code. It makes for great drama. For other heroes, it doesn't work, and that's perfectly okay, but for Batman, I think it works wonders. Back on topic with Batman Beyond though, I absolutely love the show. Kevin Conroy does such a fantastic job as an older, crankier, sassier, really annoyed Bruce Wayne, and that's absolutely fantastic for him. And Terry McGinnis is Terry McGinnis. I glaze him enough in my Batman Beyond videos. I want this video to be about Bruce Wayne, the Batman. And because I'm covering this in chronological order and not in the order of when it would have happened on a timeline, Watchtower Database again. That's more his lane. The next show up would be Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. And I'll be fairly honest, I think this is probably the weakest of all of the Batman portrayals that I have personally seen in the DC animated universe. And that just simply comes down to the fact that like the Justice League show is juggling so many other characters at the same time, and a lot of them have never been seen before outside of small cameo appearances in the Superman animated series or the Batman animated series. And even then, they don't get a lot of coverage. I'm looking at Wonder Woman. They do almost nothing with Wonder Woman in that show, and it bugs me to no end. But at least this Justice League's a lot better than the 2004's Batman's Justice League. But I don't want to talk about that. Anyways, back on topic, Batman doesn't get a whole lot for him to do, character-wise, a lot of the times in these episodes. But again, I do find him enjoyable. I do love the fact that he's a part-timer until like Unlimited. I love the idea of Bruce having his own couple solo episodes. The one where he has to stay awake and face off against the Nightmare. Dude, that one was actually so much fun. I love the episode specifically, What Do You Get a Man Who Has Everything? Mongrel has crashed Superman's birthday party and given him a hellish nightmare to live, which is essentially a perfect world in which he would never have... Krypton never blew up. He's married to a Kryptonian woman who I thought was Lois Lane as a kid. He has a son. His life is good. But when Batman gets it, the only thing he sees in his happily ever after is his dad beating up the man who killed his parents. That's all Batman ever wanted to see. And while fairly accurate, I would have preferred something a little different, especially for how old this Batman is in the show's continuity and how long he's been around with the Bat family and everything. But I thought this was pretty good. It also does a little bit to undermine the Perchance a Dream episode. But, you know, all's well that ends well. But overall, Batman is extraordinarily fun throughout the Justice League episodes, especially him and Wonder Woman. It also led to a lot of shipping of him and Wonder Woman, which I'll leave that ball in your guys' court. I'm not gonna make any official statement. I don't want to get crucified this week in the comments, especially because I'm already like 2 weeks late on this video. Yeah, no thanks. And overall, I just thought Justice League was absolutely wonderful. Kevin Conroy, again, he just always knocks it out of the park. But there's one thing I want to talk about before we wrap all of this up. The Batman Arkham games, while not technically a part of the DCAU, share a lot of the same writing staff, including Paul Dini, along with a lot of the same voice cast from the show reprising their roles, with some exceptions like Ashley Williams being everybody's favorite Oracle, but obviously Batman and Joker are voiced by Kevin Conroy and of course the wonderful Mark Hamill. I just wanted to talk about it because, well, this is my 100th video since I started talking about superheroes and superhero content, specifically movies and TV shows. I'm not counting the one video game video that I did, but this is like my 100th. And I figured wrapping it all around with talking about Arkham Asylum, which is the first video on my channel. If you bother scrolling all the way back, you can find it. It's really crazy to me to think how far I've come throughout this time on my channel, and so I wanted to take a second and talk about the Arkham games because I love them so much, and I don't know if I'll get an excuse to talk about them again on this channel because Kevin Conroy does a fantastic job as Batman in all three games. Even if I think Batman doesn't do a whole lot when it comes to character development, or sometimes not having a whole lot to challenge his moral compasses, especially in the first game, I thought that it was awesome and exciting, and I loved playing these games. The combat system was revolutionary, and of course, one of my favorite aspects about it was the third game and that challenging of Batman's moral compass, even if the third game I don't think was perfect combat-wise. I'm looking at the Batmobile. And of course, as we're wrapping up the video, it is unfortunately time for me to kind of say goodbye. Part of this video for me is closure, because Kevin Conroy, for the majority of almost all of my life, was Batman. I was born in 2005, so from 2005 until 2022, Kevin Conroy was always the one constant as Batman throughout my time growing up. And I think that that was really awesome for me to have. That consistency, especially under 2 different CEOs, 6 different Batmans in live action, not counting Adam West this time, because technically he started voicing after Adam West, but that's besides the point. Basically, Kevin had always been around, and for the most part with his interpretations of Batman, had always been putting on a face of that compassionate, kind, caring Batman. We don't talk about the one time, and this was really cool though, that he played Batman in live action for the CW and their Crisis plot. Really cool, but yeah, that Batman was just a terrible guy. Unlike a majority of the Batmans Kevin Conroy played and was able to perform. This idea of heroism and vengeance that was used for the side of good, that he didn't have to kill his villains in order to move the plot forward, but rather could believe in a system that is unfortunately extraordinarily flawed. And I just loved it so much, especially growing up as a kid. Kevin Conroy was a reason that before Nightwing was my favorite superhero, it was Batman for a while. And then after Nightwing, it was Batman for a little bit, and then it was Static. And if all of that is coming to an end, then I think the best way we get to say goodbye to Kevin Conroy, not only as an actor, but as Batman, would be through his final performance of Batman. And thankfully it wasn't the Suicide Squad game. Even though I don't think it's as bad as everybody says it is, because I've played it, this is the best ending and send-off you could ever ask for a character. Batman went out doing what he always does with Mark Hamill as the Joker, fighting until his very last breath. And I think that is very poetic for his character. And I just want to say thank you so much, Kevin, for everything you gave me growing up and that sense of consistency that I sometimes lacked growing up. So if this is how it had to end, this is the perfect way to go.
I care, Joker. About Gotham. About justice. And if it has to end, at least I go out like this, being Batman.
I want to take this moment once again just to thank Kevin Conroy. His performance as Batman was something that will always stick with me. He's the voice I hear every time I read a Batman comic. Every time I think of Batman, that's the voice that I hear. And to have it be him, such a genuinely nice dude, somebody who cared about other people, and who also just seemingly was always down for any interview. When I was doing research for this video, I was shocked by how many interviews he did for smaller, almost non-existent channels for these video games. And these would be like interviews in swarms of people. He would still find time to give them an intro using the Batman voice and to answer these questions. And that to me is phenomenal. This video has meant a lot to me. It was originally like 3 hours long, but for the sake of not boring you all to tears and also my own sanity and getting this video out in somewhat of a reasonable time, it's probably not even half that length anymore. But once again, I just want to say to all of you guys who have probably sat through what is the longest video I've ever done in one sitting, basically, thank you so much for watching. Your viewership is unparalleled. I could not do this without you all. 100 of these videos to me is absolutely insane. It's really, really special. It's something I cherish. I love doing this as my job, and I have you all to thank for it. So thank you guys so very much. And to hopefully way more than 100 more of these videos, ladies and gentlemen. All right, time to do my whole YouTuber spiel. Thank you all so much for watching the video once again. If you liked the video, please leave a like. It helps out the channel a lot. If you disliked the video, leave a dislike and then let me know down in the comments below why you don't like the video. Constructive criticism truly helps me to be a better creator for all of you. As well, if you want to sub, it's free. You can always unsubscribe later, but don't feel pressured to. And finally, I do have a Patreon in which you can see each and every one of these videos early, completely unedited. So I probably had to do a lot of finagling to get around the copyright system because DC likes to really put the hammer down on me for these specific videos. But if you want to see my original vision for the video, it's up on my Patreon for about $1 a month. As well, you will gain access to the Discord where you can communicate with me and a growing number of fans who just want to talk and hang out, talk about videos, comic books, movies, TV shows, whatever. And finally, I wanted to take a moment to shout out my $5 and above Patreon patrons. These guys are amazing. They help me to keep making these videos every single month and to also help to not worry about how many videos a month I have to make. So shout out Belladonna, shout out Oscar, shout out McGann, shout out eSibert13, shout out Gabriel Alfonte, Transgears1, Video Gamer 75, Golden Boy 420, Dakota Rawson, Donovan Gomez, and MC Bomb 27. Wow, there are a lot more of you guys than I remember. Thank you all so much. I hope you all, each and every one of you, has an absolutely fantastic day.